Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV, and what we do here is for free in the love of Jesus Christ and for Holy Mother Church, and we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. To and everything you donate now by check, through mail, through the Order Militaris Inc. mailing address, everything goes to equipment. Nothing goes to us. And this will help us to keep bringing you unbiased, hard-hitting, uncensored, non-political correctness truth. And welcome, Brother Alexis Bonolo, to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me back on Order Militaris Radio TV. It's always a pleasure to be on this new independent media, breaking grounds, and saying so much truth that we're getting persecuted just for saying it, so let's keep doing it. We are church militant, okay? The others call themselves church militant, but we're the real. We try to be the real deal without using a name. Okay, so today we're going to talk about just how the deep state controls the whole society and how that control can be broken. And you've done a lot of research and preparation for this show, AJ. You want to give a brief summary about what we're going to talk about, whet people's appetite?
From mostly thanks to Sutton, we know pretty much who the handlers are of the deep state. It's the bankers and Wall Street folks in Manhattan on Broadway Street next to City Hall. Since we've named them before, Brown Brothers Harriman and Chase Manhattan and others. So we thought, what a good thing for politics is to finally end the deep state. And so today's show is going to be on how to dismantle and take down the actual puppeteers of the deep state.
Now, when we mean taking down the handlers of the deep state, what do we mean precisely? Lest anyone think that we're advocating taking out guns and.
No. When the Christian Party of America gets to power, through state elections, federal elections, no one in the Republican Party or the Democrat Party has ever even laid a glove on those in the deep state. And by knowing who they are, thanks to Sutton, by taking down the handlers of the deep state, we mean going after these banks legally, lawfully, and doing something that the Nuremberg court should have done and should have been allowed to do, and seize their assets, try them for, if they can still be tried for crimes against, hundreds of millions of people.
So most people don't know that the big banks in New York City are all controlled by Yankee families who came here, some among the first colonists. But the United States is not the private club of the Yankees, okay? They are a tiny, tiny little fraction of the United States. And the United States doesn't exist to make them wealthy. And the people of the United States don't exist to make them wealthy. And they have no right to rule the US any more than their votes. And if they are not even 1% of the population, then obviously they shouldn't be running the country, let alone running the world and massacring hundreds of millions of people. So we're talking about a very evil group of people, a very evil group of racists. And we gotta face the evil in our country if we're going to wipe the face of America clean of all this guilt and all this corruption. So what are some ways that the Christian Party of America can propose to get the banks and investment houses under control?
I've been looking at that and looking at the old state charters from in, 1800s and early 1900s, where if you had to open a bank, it couldn't be private. It couldn't be your privately, you know, like a private clubhouse or anything. It had to be controlled and ran by the state with laws and rules. And, and the state officials had to go in and check it out, make sure everything was still following the standards and the codes of the state that they put in force. And thinking that'd be one way to bring back these banks and investment houses to being reined in and properly controlled.
Yeah, I think one of the big problems with banks is that, yeah, you're right. They're run like private clubs to make their friends wealthy and use everyone's money to make their friends wealthy. And if that's what a bank is, then a bank is using the public trust for private gain, and that's misuse, and they should pay for that. Okay, so if they're an institution that's there to help the common good, then they should serve the common good and not private good. And if they serve private good, then that should either be made illegal or they should pay for the right to do that. I mean, actually pay the public. And I'm big on independence of businesses, but there's something about a bank that is not just private. It is kind of like a public institution.
Mm.
And you can't have civilization unless the public institutions are promoting civilization. And what we've seen here with these banks and these books by Sutton is that not only do they not promote civilization, they're destroying and tearing down civilization solely for the sake of the idol of profit. And that is criminal.
Mm-hmm.
It is inhumane, and it merits to be restrained by law. And that's the whole vocation of Christians is to promote morality and lawfulness around the world. Not lawfulness in the sense of following man's laws, but following God's laws.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what exactly do you think is really needs to be changed in downtown Manhattan and Wall Street?
Well, even though it looks small on a map, and it really is small, because if you look at it, it's walking distance to all these areas and all their Masonic lodges. And I was like, well, maybe one giant exorcism.
That's certainly true. Yes.
Um, then I don't know. I just like there's something evil in that downtown area that where the Soviet Union was put into power, where Nazi Germany was put into power, and communism was spread throughout the world in that area.
Yeah. Well, I think you put your finger on it. I think if a bank is going to be serving the public good, no one who works in that bank can be a Freemason, because the Freemasons' objective is not the common good; it's the destruction of Christianity and enslavement of humanity. And the Masonic Lodge is an evil criminal organization of morally degenerate people. So that be the first thing. So if these are Masonic banks, then the banks have to be taken as institutions out of their hands, and there has to be like I think banking regulations need to have to set the highest level of ethics. That has to say that these institutions have to promote the common good, and they can't be involved in all kinds of shady deals and investments. And the people that run the bank can't use the money the way they want to. I think if banks had to publicly admit how much they're loaning to everyone, I think that would be the first step, force them to be
Mm-hmm.
transparent. So if they're giving their friend a very favorable loan, that would immediately be considered corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the CEO of a bank, the boards of directors of a bank, the shareholders shouldn't be able to invest money in their friends. If they're opening accounts to the public and saying the public can put money in our bank, then they have to, in return, be obliged by the state to use that money for the public's good, not their own. Otherwise, they're exploiting the common trust for private interest. I think those are some of the most fundamental things. And I think they should be obliged to follow Christian morals,
Mm-hmm.
which is the highest set of morals known to mankind, and redirect their entire investment portfolio that way. Um, and certainly not buy people, buy people in debt. Like Trump seems to be controlled by bankers because he was so much in debt. And that kind of control of a person just shouldn't be allowed. There shouldn't be any, well, I went bankrupt, but I didn't go bankrupt because I decided to make some deal with the bankers behind doors, and therefore I'm not going bankrupt, but from now on, I'm really belong to the bankers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's against human liberty. That's a form of slavery, and
Mm-hmm.
even huge amounts of money. But the more serious charges are their involvement in war crimes, and I think Sutton has very well established that the three main banks in New York are heavily involved in war crimes, and they've never paid for that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do we? How can we? How could the Christian Party follow up with the arrest warrant for them that was never given to them and put into action? I mean, it's been what 45, 46, from 46 to whenever Christian Party comes into power.
Well, you can pass a law and eliminate the statute of limitations, and they make them saying crimes against humanity have no statute of limitations on the category of murder. I think that already is the case, but if there was an arrest warrant put out, enact it, I say. If under Roosevelt they ordered to Herman Brown Brothers Harriman should have their assets seized for treasonous activity, execute that order.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's not anything novel or new. That wouldn't show any prejudice on the part of a new party. Just do what Congress said should have been done years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and hear that call. Even now, it's 80 years down the line, because um, there has to be, if we're going to say to people around the world that we are a land of freedom and justice, well, we better be a land of freedom and justice and not of tyranny and corruption.
Yeah.
I think that would be some general ways, but because the people who did it are dead now,
Mm-hmm.
but the banks as institutions should be made to pay or somehow be taken under control. I think banks who have done extreme amounts of evil, like Brown Brothers Harriman, should be taken out of control, so that any of the families investors had anything to do with that should no longer have anything to do with that. And if it is that Brown Brothers Harriman is legally culpable for this, then I don't see any problem about putting all their assets into a fund and making anyone around the world who suffered from their evil actions make a claim on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be justice, because and not just ending it there, but all the families that made money through these banks, they should also be held, even if it was their grandparents that did it. That money's blood money,
Mm-hmm.
and that was made on the deaths of hundreds of thousands and millions in concentration camps and in wars that were totally unjust.
Yeah. So we know Brown Brothers Harriman took in Nazi gold from one of the books, but if when the administration comes in power and we start to do issue these search warrants, what would happen? What should happen to it if we found the Nazi gold in their vaults or wherever?
Well, it probably has already been melted down long, long ago. But obviously, if you found it in the gults in their vaults, they would be really guilty, and they probably already got rid of it. But nevertheless, the mere fact that they traded in it, Brown Brothers Harriman now manages assets of 6,500 billions. So 8 billion in gold back then is worth, it's probably worth 800 million today. So 800 billion today. So or something of that order. Well, they certainly have enough money to pay for that. If it were, if the government didn't require them to pay back all the countries of Europe or had the gold reserves robbed, and I
Mm-hmm.
doubt they did. So they probably argue, well, with the Marshall Plan, the taxpayer already paid Europe back. Well, then, if that's the case, then that 800 billion belongs to the U.S. government. Do we pay the taxpayer?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's one thing. But somehow, I mean, when Germany was conquered, the Allies imposed a thing called a denazification program, which was to make sure that the Germany after World War II would not be inspired by Nazi doctrine. So, do you think we need something like that for New York? We have to kind of like de-Masonify New York City, this section in New York City. There's something deeply and fundamentally wrong there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Denazified, de-communist-fied, de-Masonic-fied, de-evil-fied.
Have you have anything particular come to mind on what we could do, what we could suggest?
Mm. I was remember right, they were be have to be some sort of um, I guess you would term it re-education class, but it wouldn't just have to be book learning. It would have to be, you know, learning it, living it. Then I know they like the parole officers have to check on things like that, but they're like, so how you doing with your stuff and all that? You need meet them on the street and you test them.
Yeah, one of the big problems with this part of New York is people are psychopathic. They just think making money is the only morals. And I think anyone who thinks that way shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a financial institution, let alone big ones of this kind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in modern Germany, if you even have a Nazi flag in your house, well, you can never serve in politics or you can never hold an office. So I think Masons should be outlawed from ever working in financial institutions, and
Mm-hmm.
anyone who's completely moral. I think a good requisition is that they have to accept that there is objective morality and that making money isn't the highest goal.
Mm-hmm.
And um, maybe a system of watching all their financial transactions, where they're going, and
Mm-hmm.
see what kind of companies they finance. If these banks really control the American economy, that has to stop. American economy should be free. There shouldn't be a fake economy controlled by just a few. Like we found out that Peter Thiel has invested in more like than 1,000 startups, was it? Or
Yeah.
10,000, some huge number. And so whatever online payment system you use, they got money from him. And so are they all really different companies? Or are they just all manifestations of the same small clique that are just trying to dominate the entire economy, all funded out of New York? So
Mm-hmm.
um, I think it's very dangerous to the United States that a small section of the country dominates the entire economy. I think there's something, maybe they should be broken down. You know, like in the early 20th century, they broke up the monopolies. They broke up Standard Oil and broke it into 6 different companies, so it wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be so big and have such influence. And maybe these banks need to be broken too. Maybe it should be a law that a bank shouldn't have more than like 500 billion in managed assets to prevent them from being overthrowing the democracy and being too powerful.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. And and these and was the nepotism or something like that, where oh, we only welcome a certain type of group into the organization, so no more skull and bones, no more anything like that.
Yeah, I think really, yeah. The Masonic Lodge should be outlawed just on the basis that it is not a democratic institution.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a moral institution. It doesn't. It is involved in criminal conspiracies, And it is a place for morally delinquent people to associate. And just like you can outlaw people in a red light district, like prostitutes, if you can outlaw prostitution, you should be able to outlaw the Masonic Lodge, which is far worse than any prostitute. Yeah, that's so true. But I think government, so we talk about their involvement in Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, but Sutton has really probably only touched the surface. Do you think the government should have special investigations about exactly what they were involved in and everything that they did?
Yeah. I mean, all the books by Sutton should be hauled into the Congress, into whatever, and have all the records of all these companies on the table. And they flip through one book, and you're like, okay, bring up the Harrimans. So the file of the Harrimans come through. They open up the book by Sutton, like, guilty.
Yeah, but there's probably a lot more than that. The names of everyone involved, not just the bank itself, but all their agents, all their employees, all their directors, and all the subsidiaries, all the people involved in the messaging, and all the people involved in bribing the US government, controlling both parties. The length of crimes is so deep and long. You'd need like the kind of commission they had in South Africa to go through all the corruption of the apartheid.
Yeah.
Because in a way, this is it's endemic, and the deep state isn't called deep for no reason. But people, I think that term is tried to use to hide what really is the people shouldn't call it deep state. It's the Masonic Lodge, but not all Masonic lodges. Now, we as Catholics don't believe any Masonic lodge is morally upright, but the ones who've had money and have been involved in directly these kinds of controls and abuses, they're really evil. They're not just men's clubs of people who don't believe in God. They're actually people who are serving Satan. And
So if these companies have to be, closed down and their assets seized and used for reparation money, or even paying back the huge debt they got the U.S. government into to do World War II and other wars, what should be done to the buildings?
I don't know. I mean, I can if Sutton is right on what he says about Brown Brothers Harriman being involved in both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. I think they're built. They don't own that building in downtown Manhattan. It's actually owned by a German bank that was once owned by the Reich. So it's actually owned by a former Nazi bank. But I think that building should be torn down, and they should build a huge monument to all the dead that were killed by Brown Brothers, so people remember for the rest of the time that in this place there was once a bank who was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of millions, and the directors of which were more evil than all the dictators of the 20th century, and have statues of the peoples of every nation and race who died in wars that these people started. I think that would be very fitting, because something that evil can't be left to stand. It is an abomination.
Yeah. So by removing these banks, or removing their controls of the banks and reforming them, who are the handlers of everyone involved, this deep list, how much freer will America be after all of this?
Well, if you read American history, at the beginning of the country, the US acted very differently than it acts today. Something happened after the Civil War, but before the Civil War, the United States was a very American country. It was very pro-American. Even in Sutton's books, when he's quoting members of Congress who are investigating what happened in the Second World War, you notice something that's totally amazing.
Yeah, and and they were going after Standard Oil for producing the gasoline for Nazi Germany, and they slapped the both houses of Congress slapped the treason charge on them. But it wasn't acted on because, well, FDR was part of the Standard Oil.
Conspiracy, yeah. But boy, that's so unlike the Congress.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the first effects of solving the problem of the deep state, and should also include eliminating from the possibility of ever holding elected or appointed office anyone who's financially connected to these banks and to these lodges. And then you'll see America complete in just a year have an entirely different face, because it will no longer be these elites that are just so anti-American in everything they do. It will be like the common American you meet on the street. The government will have like a totally personality change, because these people are not America. These people don't represent anything America stands for. They are the disgrace and dishonor of America. They are the cancer in our country. And I think the change would be absolutely amazing and wonderful. Personally, that's what I think.
Yeah. So.
And things will change too, because I don't know if well, for those who've traveled to Europe or at least seen picture books of Europe, you notice there's something vastly different between Europe and the United States. If you go through a European city, you see beautiful things, natural things, artistic things, uh, a beautiful native culture, and every town is different, and the way they do everything is. You come in America and it's standardized, industrialized, blah. If
Mm-hmm.
you've been to one American city, you've been to every American city. They don't put their wealth in building cathedrals or building beautiful public buildings. Everything is, reduce it down to absolute profit. And so constantly we under these influence of these bankers, we don't have a society that's civilized. We just have a production machine or making money. And this, I think, is one of the things that would change greatly in America. We'd return to human civilization, not a civilization where we exist to make them money, but a
Mm-hmm.
civilization that is humans living to the best of their abilities in every aspect and talent that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And it would begin to show itself even in the architecture of the cities and the way people live. And it would be a much more beautiful country.
Yeah. Yeah. You see in what should be double buildings and double houses in New Mexico and southern Texas. You see skyscrapers and just blah blah blah, and the culture is gone.
Mm-hmm. Culture, the individual cultures of every state and county and stuff, that's what makes people different and makes them free and proud to be who they are. And a person who knows his identity because he's free to express himself that way is a person not likely to be enslaved. He's a person who understands he's worth more than just money.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the horrible things in American culture, that they say, well, we need progress, we need prosperity, but no, we need civilization.
Mm-hmm.
A country that's killed 60 million children and now wants to put masks on every face and shut people in the houses. That's not civilization. That's barbarity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the face of America. That's the face of the Masonic Lodge.
Mm-hmm. So, in the Christian Party of for America, we want to restore our culture in every state. I mean, there used to be beautiful Spanish ponchos in New Mexico, Spanish ponchos in South Texas, beautiful leather works of Native Americans, and beautiful custom belts. Um,
Let's
Just
not forget the beautiful culture of the South
yeah.
with their mansions and their clothing and the way of life. And well, every part, even in New England, they had the Puritans had their own culture. It wasn't entirely bad, but even in the 19th century, they had a beautiful Gothic revival in the cities, which has now totally disappeared. Something we won't have civilization unless we realize that making money is not the highest, or it shouldn't be the highest goal. And we have to have morals that are higher than making money. And these kind of people who only want to make money, they can't even have access to government because they're degenerates, they're morally
Mhm.
degenerate people. And that's a value that even in public schools needs to be taught. People need to be taught that avarice is a horrible vice, and it's a terrible distortion of humanity. And
Yeah.
uh, that's not taught at all in schools. It's almost like the TV and the media too are highly influenced by these banks, and that needs to be changed too.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Been seeing what people's like. We did fine before we had a what that the education administration, whatever it's called.
and Department of Education.
I was like, yeah, I seen those old tests that from the 1880s that the kids took in eighth grade. I was like, whoa.
How could you pass? Yeah, who could pass that today? Yeah, eighth. I've seen textbooks from the eighth grade in the 1880s. They're like college textbooks today. They've dumbed down so much that you see some people graduate from college. You don't even know the same thing you graduate when I graduated from high school.
Hmm.
And there's been the dumb down. See, they need to dumb down America, so you just vote for every candidate they give you. But
Hmm.
if you're actually intelligent, then you would be reading books like Sutton, and you'd never vote for them again.
Hmm.
That's why we highly recommend Sutton's books. And some people so mind controlled, they go, "Oh, Sutton's not telling you the truth. The real enemy is communism. It's not the bankers of New York." Yeah, but the bankers of New York. I was recently attended a conference on civil rights here in Italy, and the first speaker to speak was a Marxist, and he spoke all about the problem of capitalism and stuff like that. Then I spoke, and I talked about how the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank financed fascism and communism, and this guy's face just fell right off because it was like he just realized that he's been used by capitalists. And the whole Marxist movement is merely a tool of capitalism. He realized, he saw that, and he was just like so dismayed that this is the real game they've been played on humanity, and we need to get back to being human beings. But we can only do that if we outlaw the lodge. The lodge really has to go. It's a criminal organization. It's not a fraternal organization.
Yeah. And that gives me an idea for education deal. Um, if we can find those old textbooks, reprint them, reuse them.
Or at least to learn from them, because they teach people what they need to do. For example, in the United States, if you look at where all the great thinkers of America came from, or even the great men, you see they all came from parts of the country where in that generation, they were all studying the classics. They learned Latin, they learned Greek, they read the great books. And I don't mean what they call the great books today that has crazy writers like Kant, Nietzsche, and Descartes, who are absolute idiots and evil men. I mean, the great thinkers of the past, you know. And if we restore that kind of education, then Americans will become a true light on the hill to the nations, and not just in propaganda and slogans. And a country which people won't just think of as a place to go to, but a true friend among nations, not someone to dominate people for the sake of democracy, which really means serve the banks of New York. That's all
Mm-hmm.
it's really meant.
So, mm, so, um, anything else?
I would encourage people to, contact Catholic Party for America through the website, Christian partyforamerica.wordpress.com. And do in the United States what we're doing here in Italy. We founded our Catholic Party last week, and so we're going ahead. We already have 80 members, and people writing in, they say, "Oh, we love your program because it's just, sanity, not like what we have going on in here in Italy." And unfortunately, in the United States, it seems there's a much heavier psychological control. People think that either the Democrat Party or the Republican Party is going to save them, even though it's absolutely clear, if you know the least bit of history, that they're the parties destroying America. And well, the Republican Party isn't really Republican anymore because everyone's running it has been a Democrat. Reagan was a Democrat. Trump's a Democrat. The Bushes, well, they were Republicans, but they didn't really undo anything the Democrats did. They pretty
Mm-hmm.
much just pushed the military industrial establishment. We don't have a party that is pro-Christian. We don't have a party that is pro helping the little guy. We have parties that are experts in all the slogans and in manipulating people to vote for them as the only salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And people need to break free from this dichotomy that it's Democrat or Republican. Both are the one party, and they're both the enemies of humanity and of America. They're not American parties. They're Masonic parties, and they're run by New York City bankers.
Mm-hmm.
And people have to realize that these parties aren't going to save them. They're just manipulating them. And until they get that kind of level of understanding what's going on in American history, it's going to be hard for them to break from it because it's like an addiction, well, it's either salt or sugar, no,
Mm-hmm.
both are poison. But this is what Americans need to do. And I would hope that Catholics would lead the way. Unfortunately, the church in the United States is almost entirely destroyed now. I can't say there's one bishop I would say is a leader. There are some good bishops out there. I highly respect Bishop Gracida, but the others, they say occasionally a good thing, but they don't lead on any issue. They don't stand out there and put themselves at risk. It's an occasional statement to get some public points, and of popularity, but they don't, or if they make a battle about anything, it's some minor detail that really has nothing to do with anything and won't change what's going on in America. So, when the ship is sinking, you either help people evacuate or you give them absolution, but you don't sit there and talk about, minor issues because, and the ship of America is sinking. I mean, it's pretty obvious. People think Trump will save them in the next election. They're going to see how much Trump, after the election, becomes even more a globalist, even
Mm-hmm.
more pro-Masonic, and even less American, because then he won't need your vote anymore. So then you're going to see the true face of him.
Mm-hmm.
And well, he's already shown his true face. He's all talk and no action, really. He'll
Yeah.
do that little he'll do that little decorative change, a new decoration here or there, but he has not touched Obama with all the crimes Obama committed. He's not put a finger on Hillary, who's committed horrible crimes. Both of them, and Biden too, for that matter, both of them, he's never touched them because he just pretended to be their enemy, but he's really their friend. I mean, Hillary's the one that suggested he run for the presidency. So it's the
Mm-hmm.
same class of people. We didn't get a change in 2016. You were sold change by the people who were already in power, and they just kept their club going. It just
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have a communist wallpaper. It has a capitalist wallpaper, but it's the same building.
Mm-hmm.
And Americans have to wake up and stop being stupid. Okay, people have to realize that it is shameful for us to be so stupid and so inclined. But it's hard because there's so many false apostles out there. All these laymen that have come out of the woodwork in the last 15 years, not a single of them is willing to stand up for Christ or the faith. They are all false apostles. I saw a tweet the other day by one of them and says, well, if you don't like what's going on, then do X, Y, Z. But, well, if you don't like what's going on, tell people what's wrong with it. Just don't tell them to flee here or flee there. Taylor Marshall, he says, well, if you don't like what's going on in Rome, then go to a Latin mass and hide out or something. Well, why don't you tell them what's wrong? You won't tell them what's wrong in Rome because you want to be friends of the people who are part of the problem in Rome. That's the problem. And I'm a Roman Catholic in the sense of I live at Rome and I am a member of the diocese. And I can tell you that people like Taylor Marshall are absolutely full of it. And if you're wasting your time listening to him, you won't know the first thing what's going on in the church because he only wants to kiss up. That's all he does. And the same thing, Skojic is even worse. Mike Vorse is a bit less, but they won't even talk about the real problems because they all want to have a bishop or cardinal friend. They all want to be invited to this party or promoted by this big television company. And they're not willing to tell you the truth. They're false apostles. They don't have the heart of men or of fathers. They couldn't care less if your children are damned or your grandchildren are aborted because they keep wanting you to obey the whole Masonic order. They don't want you to break free of it. And it's either because they're so stupid they don't realize these things are Masonic, or that they're Freemasons themselves. And those are the only two possibilities. I'm not going to answer that question. I don't know the whole person, but they just won't break free of the Masonic categories that are given to them. They won't. Like Mike Vorse, he won't say Bergoglio is the cause of the problem. It's always this bishop or that bishop. And Taylor Marshall won't even look at the renunciation. He says the most absurd things, and he doesn't know the first thing about canon law. And he doesn't have the even humility to tell people, you investigate on your own. It's always listen to me and follow what I'm telling you. And if that's not deep state control, I don't know what is. No one should tell you that. Okay, no one, everyone should say, look at the teaching of the church, the documents of the church, and follow what the church has always taught. They
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't tell you what to think. If they're telling you what to think, that's controlled narrative, and that is Masonic. And no true apostle has ever done that. And first of all, laymen have no authority to teach in the church. They have none. They don't have any even forsaken career, money, property, fame, or sex for Christ. So they haven't sacrificed anything for Christ. Why on earth are you listening to them? Okay. When I grew up, you only listened to priests and religious. You never listened to a layman about squat on morals or theology. You never, because they're compromised. They're not yet. They didn't have the courage, or they didn't get the grace to overcome all those things that would compromise your teaching. I mean, how can you teach truth about marriage if you're involved in you can't. You can't. So these are some of the fundamental things that Catholics in America need to change if they're ever going to have a Christian party and have true liberty. They have to really break out of and start following Christ, the saints, the teaching of the church, and the great Catholic thinkers of the ages, and not these absolute pretentious lay airheads, excuse me, that won't tell you the truth, or they're telling you constantly submit. Vote Trump. He's your salvation. That's
Mm-hmm.
basically what they're saying. Jesus Christ, no, they don't care anything about Jesus Christ. And liberating their country from Freemasonry, no, they're not. They'll talk about that a week after the election, but before every election is vote, and they're going to tell you how to vote because but never vote for a Christian party that's actually anti-Masonic. Oh, I'm totally for the reign of Christ. Well, how about a party that's for reign of Christ? Oh, no, you should never vote that party because they'd never win. I mean, who talks that way but someone who doesn't believe in Christ the King?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see any belief there.
Yeah, it's getting pretty bad on Church Militant. I think this is like the third or fourth time they had Steve Bannon on. And we know from that video on the Jewish banks, he's a Zionist.
Oh yeah, yeah. He proposed to found a group in Europe to train future politicians. And what was the purpose of this institute? To teach Judo-Christianity. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what is that? You know, it's not like Jews had any impact on the civilization of Western Europe. They didn't. It was called Christianity. And if Steve Bannon is so compromised by Jewish bankers that he actually wants to teach politicians in the West Jewish ideas, then he's not in touch with reality because that's not never been the history of Europe. And he's pushing a different agenda. And well, he's going to lose his monastery in Italy because the petition they filed to obtain it was just so full of fraud. And now he's being charged of misusing funds on the build the wall kind of project. So pretty dodgy character, I'd say. But Nevertheless, when he was on with Mike Vorse, according to what I heard, he asked Mike Vorse, he talked with Mike Vorse about a lot of important issues that Mike Vorse wasn't even going to talk about. Mike Vorse wasn't going to discuss anything but don't vote for Biden. And that was like bizarre. It was almost like reverse roles. You would expect Bannon just to say, vote Trump, vote Trump, vote Trump, and not discuss anything else. And you would expect that Mike Vorse speak about a whole bunch of other issues, but it's like they reversed roles. And
Yeah. So tomorrow's program will take up another chapter on the national suicide, military aid to the Soviet Union. Now, if you had family members who fought in the Korean War and Vietnam War, this will be some hard truth to take, and it's going to be shocking to you because it's going to get into everything about the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So, and I'm kind of nervous about it too.
yeah, how American companies actually help the Marxists kill your great uncle, your grandfather, or your father, or depending what generation you are, your uncle.
Yep. So don't have a timetable, but well, we'll get it out there tomorrow, whenever. Please like and share this program. If you want to make a donation, you got to go to ordo-militaris.us. Go to the contact page. You'll see the mailing address for Ordo Militaris Inc. Make your check out to Ordo Militaris Inc. And in the memo section of the check, right, donation for Ordo Militaris Radio TV. And yeah, that's what we got right now.
And thank everyone who sends in a donation. And for those of you who've given either members of our order and pledged, or who have made a donation to the Beirut Humanitarian Fund, I wrote you all a letter this morning, and so check your email boxes for the email addresses you use to make donations to get my letters.
Yep. This is Ordo Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.